Before we jump into the research on plant-based medicine for Ebola, I think it's worth reminding everyone why we're concerned about the present Ebola outbreak. And if you missed my first video on what measles and Ebola have in common, please go back and watch it. Here are a few key points. It's out of control in the Congo. Thousands are fleeing the Congo to other countries, including the United States, across the Mexican border. Now, to reassure us, we're being told that everyone leaving the Congo for other countries has been screened for Ebola. Now, what does that mean? It means their temperature was taken. They weren't actually tested for Ebola. It can take 21 days for symptoms, including fever, to appear. So just taking a temperature and asking how they feel isn't very reassuring to me. Plus, they're running out of the Ebola vaccine. Ebola health workers are being attacked and killed, and their clinics are often burned down in the Congo. It's a war zone after all. Now, last month, when over 150 Congolese crossed over to Texas, they were bused to San Antonio, where the only private Ebola research center in the United States is located, though no connection was made in the news. And then they were bused off to cities around the country. Hundreds more were expected to arrive in Texas, and there is uncertainty to how and where they're entering. Now, I don't blame them for wanting to get out of the Congo, but with the nature of this exodus, other countries need to step up, like they did in the 2014 outbreak, to guarantee that no one with Ebola slips through without detection. Now, I'm not going to give a blow-by-blow here on this channel about the progression of this outbreak, though the main headlines can be found in the Herbal Database under Ebola 2019. There are a couple of really good channels to subscribe to that include Florida Marquis, see his Ebola playlist, and Jennifer, Veterans for Truth. She's done a great job on the Fiji couple who died in May, and also has good suggestions for preparedness. She has a nursing background, and you can get video updates on those two channels. Several times it was announced that the World Health Organization was going to announce this as an international emergency, but then they declined. They explained the reason was because it would be an economic hardship on the Democratic Republic of the Congo. Recently, another call to give international emergency status was raised. Now, I have questions. Are there people who are exposed to Ebola who don't get sick? And of those who do get sick and survive, remember, there's not yet a cure. It's treated by intensive IV fluid replacement. So what distinguishes the survivors from those who die? Answers to some of this can be found in the Herbal Database under the heading Ebola and the Immune System. This link at the top here, if you click on it, it takes you to a good article from NPR about how Ebola kills you, and that's really the place to start, is to figure out what's going on that makes Ebola so deadly. And I'm just going to read through some of this because in order to prevent and treat Ebola, we need to know how it's working in the body, what it's doing. It has a nasty reputation for the way that it damages the body, and that's rightfully earned. At the end stage of the disease, you'll have small leaks in blood vessels. You end up with essentially no blood pressure. Your body temperature drops and you go into shock. But when you look at the nitty-gritty details of an Ebola infection, a surprising fact surfaces. The virus isn't what ends up killing you. It's your own immune system. That's an important point because a lot of folks are going to think, well, what I need to do is really strengthen my immune system. And that could be a mistake, and we're going to dig into this a little bit more. So continuing, the normal job of the immune system is to eliminate infections. But when it's activated at extreme levels or it's out of control, it becomes damaging to the host. The most extreme immune attacks is called the cytokine storm. Now, in the Herbal Database, you can look up cytokine storm, find out more about that and how plants can be used to help prevent or treat that. Although many viruses like bird flu and SARS can trigger this kind of shock and awe assault, Ebola is probably the best at it. And at the end of an Ebola infection, it's the cytokine storm that kills you. Okay, so it looks like the cytokine storm itself is a key target for treating Ebola. And in the database, of course, you can learn all about it. And if you look beneath that main heading, cytokine storm, you'll see some plants and also ascorbic acid that do a really great job of treating a cytokine storm. If you click on any of those, you'll of course have a lot more information. Now, as far as ascorbic acid goes, usually for really serious conditions, it's given as an IV solution, but you can make liposomal vitamin C yourself, and it is an equivalent of IV vitamin C solution. Some say it's even more effective, and there are instructions on how to make it here in the database, of course. So we're looking at ascorbic acid, curcumin, and later I'll show you a study on how curcumin is being suggested as a treatment strategy for Ebola, and then also Echinacea species and Baikal skullcap. An advantage to zeroing in on the cytokine storm is that Ebola has to be treated early, and that can be when its symptoms can be mistaken for something else, like measles or typhus or the flu. And since these diseases can also produce a dangerous cytokine storm, if it is something other than Ebola and you zero in on treating a potential cytokine storm, you'll benefit even if it isn't Ebola. And if it is Ebola, yes, getting first-class medical care early is still the aim. Getting those IV fluids may still be needed. But we're looking at situations where the Ebola is just starting and unlikely to yet be recognized for what it is, and for when medical care is out of reach for some reason. Okay, so there's still more to learn about Ebola, and we're going to go back to the section on Ebola and the immune system. You'll see, actually I'm going to open this panel up all the way, and across the top there are a number of tabs that you can click on to learn more about it, but I'm just going to scroll through a little bit in the notes panel here. Yes, there can be natural immunity to Ebola. That was discovered in the Gabonese population. About 15% of them appear to be immune to it, even though there was never an epidemic there. It's thought that they were exposed to it in some fashion, probably from a bat or maybe eating an animal that was infected, but it wasn't enough to really get a severe disease going. Probably the symptoms were so mild it wasn't even noticed, but it was enough to give them immunity. Now that's just the theory behind why these people have an immunity to it. And one of the things that they noticed that distinguished them was that those who were immune had a significant rise in the number of T8 lymphocytes. Those are white blood cells that destroy infected cells. They're also called the CD8 T cells. I'm not going to go through a whole lot of that. You can come in the database and read it. Then looking for biomarkers associated with severe Ebola virus disease were pro-inflammatory. Those are seen in patients with fatal outcomes, but patients that had moderate outcomes, they think that the reason it was moderate is because those patients had a very strong interferon response of both the innate and adaptive responses. So regulating that part of the immune activation is thought to be another way of treating this. And if you want to read that study, this is the link. And if you click on that, there's a lot more information there. I just kind of gave a little brief paraphrasing of what it was about. Pretty interesting of what separates those with mild and those with severe Ebola. The natural killer cells play a role. Activation of the natural killer cells was recognized as a leading immune function responsible for recovery of infected people. An uncontrolled cell infection leads to impairment of immunity with cytokine storm, coagulopathy, systemic bleeding, so on and so forth. and you can click on that. And if you don't know what natural killer cells are, it's in the database. There's a lot of information there, including plants that help to stimulate those. So that's another avenue to consider. Multiple antibodies play a role. They exert cooperative effects by blocking distinct steps of the filovirus. That's the type of virus that Ebola is. There's a suggestion of creating antibody cocktails that combine complementary antiviral effects. Again, you can click on that link. The white blood cells and TLR4, those are toll-like receptor 4. And this is really interesting because one of the things that Ebola does is it sets up a decoy system to evade the immune system. And one of the things that it does is it activates macrophages that attack bacteria. And so these macrophages go crazy trying to kill bacteria, but Ebola is a virus. And so here the immune system is just going to town because these macrophages, through this receptor, the TLR4 receptor, have been turned on and it's not working. And so they try harder and harder, and that's part of what can set up this cytokine storm, because they're doing their best and there's still an infection, and the Ebola is still triggering those macrophages to go after a bacteria while it escapes detection. Here we see that they're thinking of using drugs that inhibit TLR4 activation, and that maybe it will keep those macrophages silent, and thus that's another way to help reduce the cytokine storm. There are some herbs that inhibit TLR4 activation, and you can look that up in the database under TLR4, toll-like receptor 4. This was interesting because they found that a huge percentage of the Ebola survivors make what are called cytotoxic CD8 T cells that respond to a protein of the Ebola virus, the nucleoprotein. So they are understanding more about this, and I think I'm just going to close this up now, and I'm just going to do a search for the TLR4 and bring that up. Okay, so some things activate TLR4 and we don't want to do that. Some things actually downregulate it. These are all studies, so I'm looking right now at this one. Resveratrol downregulates the TLR4 signaling pathway. Now here it's to reduce brain damage, but since we're looking at bringing down that TLR4, this is something that you might think about, is resveratrol, adding that to your cocktail. And another one we can see down here, rosmarinic acid can attenuate inflammatory responses through suppressing this TLR4 signaling pathway. The way the database works is, we can just quickly look all this up. Rosmarinic acid, because you may not know where you find that. And here on the left are a bunch of plants that contain high levels of rosmarinic acid. So we're looking at some pretty good herbal teas that people can be drinking that are high in rosmarinic acid. Okay, so let's move on. To wrap things up, let's go back to the main heading of Ebola. Looking down below, actually I'm going to close the info panel all the way by clicking that little arrow. Down below you see where I've been tracking it for several years. For the latest, go to Ebola 2019. The topic of whether it's airborne or not is worth taking a look at. Over on the far left, you see AntiEbola Agents. That's where we're going to go next. But also take a look at the testing, because you'll see there is some good testing these days that's very fast, and it's not just screening the temperature. So I'm going to click onto AntiEbola Agents. I'm going to open the info panel again, and we'll just take a look at a few of these. There's a lot of research and interest in plants for treating Ebola, and I'm just going to scroll down to a few of the ones that I'm especially interested in. Rhodiola, one of my all-time favorites, has antifilovirus properties. Remember, Ebola is a filovirus. And here they're looking at developing rhodiola as an anti-Ebola treatment. Now, Prunella vulgaris, that is self-heal, which you see over here on the left, a common plant here in Arkansas, and it too has potent anti-Ebola virus activity, and that's another one they're looking at as a novel antiviral approach. Let's scroll down a little bit further. We'll skip the quercetin and we'll skip the genistein. Now the CBD oil is for people who are suffering from post-Ebola sequelae. That is specifically the mental and somatic health of patients. And then the cistus is rock rose. It too has broad antiviral activity with low risk of virus resistance. That's rock rose, and what it does is it targets the viral envelope of proteins with HIV and filoviruses. And then to close, looking at the tabs on the top, I'm going to go to the last one on curcumin. And here we see curcumin is being regarded as a potential therapy for patients with Ebola and other severe viral infections because of what it does to suppress the cytokine storm. So we've seen that herbal medicine can help treat Ebola, which kills as a result of a cytokine storm, and that's something herbs can help suppress. Now, these are best used right away at the first signs of illness, because later on, it gets difficult to keep anything down due to the vomiting and diarrhea that can set in. And at that point, I'd be using sublingual approaches, for example, holding curcumin in the mouth to be absorbed through the oral tissues rather than swallowing it. If there was reason to suspect Ebola, I'd be hightailing it to the Ebola clinic or hospital to get those critical fluids. Some herbs do appear to be directly antiviral against filovirus. Now, the best part of all this is the diagnosis of Ebola isn't required to put them to use, since even if it's just the flu, these herbs can steer us clear of a potential cytokine storm. And when you learn about each of these herbs, you'll be surprised at how they also support wellness. They're generally regarded as safe. But do always look at the cautions. Sometimes there are drug interactions and things like that. Remember to take precautionary measures, such as using gloves, face masks, hand sanitizers, etc., to avoid contact with this virus. And thanks for spending time with me. I hope this helps everyone who's concerned about this disease, and that you never need it. And for more information on this and everything else related to our health, be sure to subscribe to the Ultimate Herbal Database and join us on Facebook at Herbal Knowledge Keepers. Thanks again. Oh, hey, please subscribe and share this video. Bye-bye.